Public education. Where do I stand on public education? I am a firm believer in public education. All the way back to high school, my high school history teacher, may he rest in peace, taught me about the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 under Thomas Jefferson, and this notion that you cannot have a functioning democratic republic without an educated citizenry. So I am a firm believer in public education. I think this is one of the United States of America's gifts to the world, this notion of universal public education. So I stand firmly foursquare behind public education. It is scandalous that Pennsylvania ranks, I think the last number I saw, it's 47th out of 50 states in state funding for public education. Not just higher ed, but K through 12 and pre-K. So I would expand access, I would expand state funding for public education, and that also leads into our tax system. Because as you know, there's a movement afoot to eliminate property taxes as the way we pay for our public education system. And I think that's wrong. So in any case, that's where I stand on public education. Thanks for your question. Medicare for all and universal health care. Health care is a basic human right, and that all human beings have a right to basic health care. Our health care system is broken in many ways. Millions of people do not have health insurance, and so this definitely needs to be fixed. Whether it's sort of wise and prudent to eliminate all private insurance, I think that's going too far too fast. What I'm in favor of is a robust public option that moves the markets and makes it commonsensical for people. It's cheaper. Prescription drugs are cheaper. Going to the co-pays are cheaper. And so I'm in favor of evolving as rapidly as we can without disrupting people's private insurance to create this public option to nudge the market so that it's just commonsensical that you would go with the public option, and over time, and hopefully in short amount of time, that we can evolve from this really pretty broken system to something that is far more accessible to far more people. So thank you for your question.
Voters' rights, suppression, and gerrymandering.
Oh, absolutely. Voter suppression. This is one of the gifts of America to the world as well. This notion that, one person, one human being, one adult human, one vote. And there is far too much voter suppression in this country. If it were up to me, I would make voting day a national holiday. It's too important to just leave to, if you can get off of work on time. I am heartened that starting next year, everybody in Pennsylvania will be able to vote by mail. So in terms of gerrymandering, I was just in this group called Fair Districts PA, in which, there were these exercises trying to develop a fairer system because, my philosophy is that the citizens should choose their politicians and the politicians shouldn't just get to choose their voters. And that's what we have right now. Yeah, I am in favor of raising the minimum wage in Pennsylvania. Right now it's at $7.50 an hour, right? It's been that way for the past 10 years. This is not enough to live on. And so I am in favor of raising the minimum wage to $12 an hour and then quickly in stages to $15 an hour because people deserve a living wage, okay? So I'm in favor of that. And the counterpoint is that, that's going to cost jobs. You've heard this before. Right, that when you raise the minimum wage, businesses are put under pressure and they have to lay off workers. But the reality is that study after study, one just came out of New York, the Federal Reserve of New York, just came out with a big study that shows that's simply not the case. That you raise the minimum wage and it doesn't cost jobs and people have more money in their pockets because in order to have a healthy, functioning democracy, we need our working class, working people to be able to live dignified lives. So that's where I stand on that. And then unions, I'm very much in favor of unions. One of my fields in graduate school was labor history. And one of the things I learned through that is that organized labor has been crucial in raising the living standards of Americans across the country. We would not have an 8-hour workday without labor unions. We would not have health and benefit packages without labor unions. So I stand foursquare behind labor unions and non-unionized workers as well. Can you hand me my water? Thank you for the excellent question.
Are you in favor of gun control?
I don't think my next door neighbor should have a nuclear weapon, do you? No, I think we need to draw some common sense lines, right? I know that Pennsylvania has a long and rich tradition of hunting and recreational use of guns, and so I think that's perfectly fine. We need some common sense gun laws in this country. I think assault weapons sales should be banned. I think there should be far more thorough background checks. I think there should be red flag laws and a whole series of common sense laws to keep guns out of the hands of mentally ill and of folks who want to do harm and want to commit violence. We have far too many mass shootings in this country, and it is overwhelmingly, you compare it across countries, and it has to do with the superabundance of guns in this country. Thank you for your question.
Clean energy, wind and solar power. Are we ready?
Are we ready for wind and solar power? The short answer is yes. The short answer is that right now, solar and wind are competitive with fossil fuels. It is also the case that fossil fuels are cooking this planet. I stand foursquare with Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old Swedish activist who says we need to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. Now, I know this is controversial because I know that fracking and pipelines have become an integral part of the Pennsylvania economy. And as your state senator, one of the first things that I would do is bring to the table a constitutional amendment to ban fracking within 2 years, to allow adequate time for transition, to end the $2.9 billion annually in subsidies that go to oil and gas, like we see up at the cracker plant up in Beaver County. Just imagine if we took that $2.9 billion a year and created market incentives for solar and wind and geothermal to nudge the markets away from fossil fuels and toward clean energy. In the process, we can create hundreds of thousands of good-paying family-supporting jobs, because the fact is that natural gas is not labor-intensive. It's very capital-intensive, okay? As opposed to solar and wind and geothermal and retrofitting buildings, putting new, windows and fenestration, increasing energy efficiency. There's so much we can do to reduce waste, to make our buildings and our transport and our heating more efficient. And so I think we need to move as quickly as we can in a way that does not harm, but in fact benefits working people in this state. And I know we can do it.
What's your stance on supporting veterans here in Pennsylvania? I don't know if that was already covered.
On supporting veterans. Yeah, I mean, these are folks who have laid their lives on the line for their country, for our country, right? And so, my understanding is the VA here in Lebanon is rated very highly, that they do a really good job treating veterans. But we also know that on the magnitude, I forget the exact number, but it's on the magnitude of 20 veterans a day commit suicide in this country. We have a massive homeless problem and mental illness problem. So we need far more resources to support these people who have been so brave and so fearless to put their lives on the line to protect the freedoms that we all enjoy, that we need to devote far more resources to our veterans. So in all kinds of ways, particularly with respect to housing and job training and mental health issues. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
I have 3 friends who have lost children to the opioid addiction. I'm really concerned about that. 3 of my son's friends have died from, fentanyl overdoses.
I'm so sorry, Faith. That 3 of your people that you know have died as a result of fentanyl overdoses. What about the opioid crisis? This is another key issue in Pennsylvania, as it is around the country. My own view is that this has been a form of legalized drug pushing on the part of Big Pharma. And that Big Pharma, just like the tobacco companies paid 20 some odd years ago in the late 90s, after decades of litigation, finally the tobacco companies paid up because tobacco causes cancer. Even though for decades the tobacco industry denied it. And I think it's very comparable with opioids. I don't know if you were paying attention to the Washington Post expose where they went through the DEA drug database and traced billions of pills across the country over the past decade and more. So this has been a systematic effort to kind of hook people on opioids, and then they move on to heroin and fentanyl. So my own perspective on this is that Big Pharma needs to pay to compensate victims of the opioid. I mean, you can't compensate for a lost life. It just can't be done. There is no price on a human life. But what you can do is to ensure that this doesn't happen again, and that families and communities and municipalities and hospitals and all the folks that have dealt with this on a daily basis are at least compensated for the many damages that they've suffered. So that's my overall view on opioids. Yes, sir.
So what are your top 2 or 3 Pennsylvania issues, the ones you want to really promote and push?
Top 2 or 3 Pennsylvania issues. Making health care and prescription drugs more affordable. That's probably number 1. I mean, these are the sort of the top 3. So health care and prescription drugs. Capping copays, for instance. We could cap copays on insulin. Prices of insulin have gone through the roof for so many people. This is a needed drug, right? People need this to live. And it's scandalous how insulin prices, this very simple drug, have gone through the roof. So in Colorado, for instance, they have capped insulin copays at $100 a month, and other states are looking at similar proposals. So number 1 in this list of 3 would be healthcare and prescription drugs. Number 2 is the transition to clean energy jobs and weaning us from fossil fuels in ways that benefit working families. And probably number 3 would be raising the minimum wage and creating a more favorable environment for working people so that people have more money in their pockets and we have a healthier, more robust economy. Because again, you cannot have a functioning democratic republic if you don't have people, if people can't put food on the table. Pennsylvania families should not have to choose between buying medicine for a loved one and putting food on the table for their children. That is just not a choice that people should have to make. Yes?
Have you given any thought to what committees you'd want to be on when you're elected?
What committees I'd like to be on? That's a good question. I'd like to be on the Energy and Environment Committee. Okay, so again, let me just close here. I'll be happy to stand around and address individual questions. But what we really need is help with this campaign. We need volunteers to go door to door. We need people to do phone banking. Because again, our adversaries have very deep pockets and are supported by special interests and lobbyists. I don't know any lobbyists. I don't know any special interests. I've never run for office before. I have no political debts to pay, other than to you, the people, to be able to have a better future for your children, for your grandchildren, and have respect and dignity and compassion for all. So that's where I stand for. Thank you very much for coming out, and we look forward to a great campaign. Thank you again for coming out.